Konnichiwa. That means that's Japanese for sup bitches. You're listening to another episode of One Miss Pod. I'm Kelly Warner.
Zack. Hello.
And today we're joined by friend of the pod, Chris VanderKaay.
Yes, repeat offender, Chris VanderKaay.
Yeah.
That's my favorite start so far. I love this.
Yeah.
How's everyone doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Just another day working hard. And how have you been, Chris? It's been a few weeks.
Yeah, I'm shocked that you let me back on this quickly. Normally people have to yeah, exactly. Normally people have to go longer and forget what I did before they're willing to welcome me back.
Oh, come on. I liked our previous episode.
No, I had a blast.
It was a good episode. Yeah, that was... So Chris was on our Kawaii-Don episode for those that haven't heard it. And it was a really great episode that you should all check out.
And today we're joined together to watch or to talk about Ringu or The Ring. I prefer to call it Ring or The Ring because I think Ringu was just the title that American distributors gave it to try to differentiate it from the new remake that was coming out. I'm not certain of that, but that's my understanding. And anyway, the Hideo Nakata movie, it's on Blu-ray and DVD now, and it's also streaming currently on Shudder if you want to watch that before continuing the rest of the pod.
And if you're going to watch that, you might want to go ahead, if you have Shudder or if you have the box set, and watch the others, because this is the first part of our Ring-a-Palooza.
I guess that's what we're calling it now.
A name which I did not check through HR whatsoever, and we're just going with it.
I guess so. And so we don't know if Ring 2 is next or if Raisin/Spiral is next, but we're going to do those, and then we're also going to do Ring 0 Birthday. A lot of Ring episodes to look forward to, and we're going to try to have different guests for each episode. But
plus we have a couple surprises in the chamber as well.
Yeah. So
it's going to be a really fun time. And I hope that y'all like The Ring, because if you don't, we're not gonna see you for like 6 weeks.
Pretty much, yeah.
So right out the gate, I just want to ask, before we get into anything else, Chris, do you have a history with The Ring, the Japanese film, more than the American remake?
I had seen it once before I rewatched it for this podcast. So if by history you mean we met once like ships in the night many years ago, it probably would have been 3 or 4 years after it was released. I was not early on in the seeing films before the American remakes had come out at that time. So I believe I would have seen the original Ring. I mean, after I saw the Ring remake that Gore Verbinski did.
I think that I probably came about it the same way, and that's actually colored my recollection of this film, which we'll get into more a little later, I guess.
Yeah. I saw the Verbinski film before the Japanese original as well. I've seen the original more than once before this time, but I like the series. But it's I still, so much of my memory of The Ring is the American ones, and it's kind of.
You know what? That's exactly right, though. It's like when I was watching this, when it got to the part where the phone called, and I'm waiting for 7 days, and you don't get any. There's no dialogue. It's just a sound, and I was like, oh, like that was made for the American remakes, and it was such a strong sort of moment that like it just burned in. Like, oh, that's just The Ring in all of them.
Also, I believe the Japanese ones, Ring refers solely to the phone call, whereas in the American films, Ring also applies to you see the ring before you die. You see the ring. It's the silhouette of the top of the well, in the sun and everything. So,
I was actually going to ask that because I was curious if the word ring or Ringu in Japanese has that same dual meaning, because it does in English, and I didn't know if.
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I do know that I believe it refers solely to the phone ringing. But yeah,
I'm going to take the guess that it probably doesn't have the same double, and at least because when you look at it, the original title, clearly, Kel, you have to be right, because it was named for a book in 91. And so you wouldn't have the visual signifier of the top of the well. I feel like that had to have been entirely taken because Verbinski has a very visual sense to him. So
Yeah, no, I really think highly of Verbinski's film, and I don't know if I'm ready to say it's better than the Nakata original or not. We'll get to that maybe some other time, but it I think it's a fine film and a very visual and interesting film. But yeah, it's this is more of a mystery movie, and that one was kind of more visual driven. I don't know, maybe that's just my take, but yeah.
well,
Well,
we'll get into that all. Oh, sorry, Chris.
oh, I was just going to say, I think one of the reasons why actually Ringu is so well remembered is because it's one of the few examples where a foreign remake of it actually did a very good job of
Yes.
distinguishing itself, and
Mm-hmm.
therefore I think the memory of both films being good has made a huge difference in people going
Mm-hmm.
back to seek both of them again.
No, I agree. I think it's probably the best of the because we kind of had an Asian horror remake boom during that time,
I am actually reading a book about that.
and it's probably the Verbinski film and the Nakata original are probably the best examples of original and remake standing next to each other as good films in their own right.
Wait, Kel.
Hmm.
You think that Ringu and Ring is a better film than One Missed Call and One Missed Call?
Yes.
The worst fucking film I have seen in a long time.
Yeah, I'm gonna diss our namesake. Yeah, the one miss pod, one miss call, one miss call remake. Sucks ass. Yes.
It does, but before we get too deep into this, let's
Mm.
just take a second on that. First off, how have you been this week? I don't know if I asked that.
Um. Oh, I've been pretty good. It's I celebrated a milestone the other day, and so I'm doing pretty well. And not a, we recorded this episode not too long after the Horrors of Malformed Men episode, so there's not a whole lot to update you on. But I'm in good spirits. I'm doing well. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing great, and I've been just working like always now, and I'm really enjoying it. Say though, do you have any streaming news that
Oh
we got to
yes.
get out?
Yeah. Okay. So only one title to mention as far as Asian horror that maybe should be on your radar is a new Netflix exclusive title from South Korea called Hashtag Alive. It's a kind of a deadly virus, maybe zombie-ish sort of Korean horror film that's debuting in the second week of September. So.
Can I just can I just say that that is a trash title?
Yeah, sure. I
That
mean,
is a
yeah.
really bad like that. That feels like the type of title where it's like it feels like a social movement that you would see on Twitter on like people that are just like hashtag. It's the type of thing that you would see people who are doing like hashtag Blue Lives Matter like tweeting like hashtag
Yeah.
alive I survived.
To me, it's the sort of title that you would expect to see like in the early 2000s, like when we started putting numbers in in text titles, like putting I don't know. It feels like trying to touch on some sort of internet sort of uh, audience that is probably laughing at them a little bit. But yeah, either
It
way,
goes
it
Yeah,
might be all right. The movie, we don't know.
Yeah, or those other ones where they will just they'll do some sort of like thing to set apart visually on the poster, but then like how does that translate when you just have to type it? Like the title "The Witch" is two V's instead of a W,
Right? Yeah.
which does, or seven with the seven instead of the V.
Yeah,
And
that's what I was
like,
trying to refer to with the numbers. Yeah,
yeah,
seven. Yeah.
there was actually though a whole movement. I want to say about 5 years ago, maybe less, of a bunch of movies with hashtags in the title because they were like, "Oh, hashtags are a thing now. Let's if we make our the title of our movie a hashtag, people will be able to find it better." But then when people do like hashtag alive or hashtag horror, I think is the one I remember. It's like that's not no. You don't know if they're talking about that movie or if they're talking about some other thing, and you just actually make it harder to distinguish your movie from the other noise.
yeah. I remember hashtag horror. I love when people do stuff like that, not thinking ahead. Like there was a I'm trying to remember now who it was. There was a found footage film that was called Untitled. And I was like, that's a terrible name to put on the Internet Movie Database. You know that, right?
Speaking of, One Missed Pod actually is kind of a title that seems to fall through the cracks, but we'll worry about that some other time.
How so?
I don't know. I searched for it on Spotify and I can't find it. I can't find it unless I look for
I
scriptophobic.
I find it on Spotify, but on the others I have no problem. Spotify, I have a hard time finding some of the bigger podcasts I'm into too. They just
Okay.
kind of, in my opinion, sorry Spotify, but they kind of have a trash service when it comes to their podcasts.
I mean, that might be. Yeah, that's the only one I've used. So yeah, that might be the problem then.
But getting back to the Ring for a second, I
mm,
want to say that one of the things that I really liked about it this time around
mm,
is the fact that so there, I mentioned that I was reading a book about these remakes, and it compares the
mhm,
two. And specifically, what it compares is the difference between the videos. And then in the Verbinski film, a lot of what happens is like finding the different pieces of the video and putting together the story of what happened. But in this one, there's no fucking reason whatsoever why there should even be a video. There's no reason why any of the like in Verbinski's, they're at least like, oh, there's a camera, there's filming, there's actually some link, and in this, it's just like spooky video. Deal with it. That's not important.
yeah, it kind of. Yeah, I mean, also in the Verbinsky one, Samara the Sadako, kind of has this thing where it's like it makes a point to say that she can conjure her dark thoughts into your head or onto x-rays or onto film, and so it's like she created it mentally, telepathically. And this one, it's sort of like it doesn't really get into that. It's interesting how it goes different directions and following different parts of the mystery that the Verbinski film doesn't.
Well, I think a big part of that is the way that when you look at Japanese narratives, they
Mm,
focus they look at questions about narrative completely differently than we do here in the West. And so like we really like to have cause and effect. And a lot of Japanese narratives are about there is an effect, we don't know what the cause is, we're just dealing with the effect.
hmm
And this feels a bit like that, though it does go and show us that okay, she was a psychic child because we have the funniest death scene of all time.
Thwack! That sound effect. She
Oh,
gets hit.
it's I wasn't thinking of that one. I was thinking
Oh,
of
okay,
I was
okay.
thinking of when we see her. Her mother is being in like some press conference,
Oh, that.
and
Oh, yeah.
then like this guy's standing, and suddenly he just like does stiff as a board and falls.
Oh,
Like
that.
it
Yeah.
looks like a Three Scrooges bit the way that he just goes.
Three Scrooges.
Yeah, I realized.
By the way, I
You
would
know
watch
the Scrooge at Christmas past, the Scrooge at Christmas future, and the Scrooge at
Okay.
Christmas
All
present.
right. All right.
I would
Well,
watch a
oh,
Christmas
sorry.
Carol Three Stooges mashup for sure. The Three Scrooges. I would watch
That
that.
would that would be
I would
that would be
watch.
actually really good.
I was going to mention something you were just talking about, which I think is interesting. We sort of said how the American film explains what the Japanese film doesn't, but obviously, since this one came out first, I
Mm,
think I think what's interesting is maybe you said it slightly differently, Zach, but I do think that America does suffer from sort of a tyranny of needing to have answers to questions.
sure.
I think people have stopped in recent years, at least, stopped enjoying something that leaves them with questions because they feel like the movie didn't do its job. And I feel kind of the opposite. I feel like I like when a movie leaves me some questions that haven't been
Mm-hmm.
answered. And I think it's interesting in this film in particular. Correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I feel like the 7 days thing that cropped up in the American one. They even explained what the 7 days was about, right? Because the 7 days is how long it takes someone to expire when they're in the well,
Right.
Yeah,
right?
she
Right.
was starving to death essentially.
Right. And
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
of that and I think, oh, they added that and then even explained that too. So, like, even more of an explanation. And it makes me think of, if I remember correctly, in The Grudge, there was never really any explanation as to why the little ghost boy made the weird sound. And I think it was only in the American remake of The Grudge where they showed you what happened so that you realized that it was the death of the cat along with the child that sort of
Mm.
somehow merged them spiritually. I don't think they ever really hinted that in the original Shimizu version.
Well, there is a Japanese there's a whole folklore around cats and the idea that like cats are very connected to the spirit world, and so if a cat would like drink on your blood or something, then you would become a cat demon. So there's already just like creepiness around cats. So throwing in a cat sound, like I feel they don't really need to explain that because people are just like, well, in Japan, people are like, well, cats are fucking scary, guys. Like, I
Yeah,
get
well,
it.
I guess that's a good point. I mean, I guess it's America having to sort of overcompensate not only for the lack of an answer, but also for the fact that there's massive cultural differences that would leave something not only unexplained but just strange.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that there has been there's been a bit more in the indie scene in the West. There's been more stories that leave questions open there, but not in the big times. And you look at some of the films that have done that. Like you look at Fear X lost so much fucking money because it just did not care about answering questions whatsoever. And it makes me kind of sad that we're so sort of stuck in that mold.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think that, like you said, the indie scene is starting to have some more ambiguity, like whether it be It Follows or The Witch, which was mentioned earlier. But you're right. I mean, the studios do kind of want to get some answers. I will say that I think that the American remake of The Ring, I think it finds decent answers that are at least satisfying for the audience. Like the idea that, oh, it took her 7 days to die in the well. That's actually kind of sad and tragic instead of just being just kind of a flat sort of explanation. But
That idea is also set up in this one because one of the lines that is said by one of the schoolgirls is that it takes that you have 7 days. So the idea of the
it's
time
there.
was already put into it. So it's not they're not entirely making it up wholesale, but they're looking at like, okay, let's try to read between the lines and build on that stuff.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. To me, the one of the biggest changes, and I know that we're kind of skipping the synopsis of this movie because I feel like most people know what this movie and the Ring remake. Cursed videotape. You see it 7 days, solve the mystery, maybe you live. Um,
Big maybe. Big fucking maybe.
maybe. And to me, one of the biggest differences is the ex-husband character, and the fact that he has like basically the sixth sense in this.
Oh, I loved him in this.
I do too. Hiroyuki Sanada. I always like seeing him in movies. Yeah.
There's a great moment when they get back from they find her corpse in the well,
Mm-hmm.
and they get back, and if you haven't seen the movie, you're like, why the fuck's the movie still happening? It's
Mm-hmm.
over, isn't it? And they just kind of like look at each other over from opposite sides of the car and be like, okay, well, I gotta go do this thing. And the music sort of swells very tragically, and you realize like, oh my god, this is the last time they see each other together. Well, this is so sad. And watching it this time, like, it really hit me for some reason. Like, I was just like this deep sense of pathos at the idea that like they're having their last moment and neither one of them knows that, and like that could happen to any of us at any time. And I was like, damn, I didn't expect to feel this bad before I started cheering at the TV.
Yeah, one of the things I liked about that character in particular, I guess that actor, I don't watch a huge amount of foreign films, at least to the degree that I go, oh, that guy. I don't frequently do that. But like, I not only did that guy this time, but I knew his name. I was like, oh my god, Hiroyuki Sanada, because
Yeah.
now that this is a 20-plus-year-old film, I've seen him in so much because he became very popular and he's popped up in all kinds of stuff all over the place now. I mean, he was in Westworld, he was in Lost, so he's become very well known on this side of the pond as well.
Really?
Yeah.
I
Also
did not recognize him.
Also in the Wolverine, Avengers Endgame. He was in Speed Racer and The Last Samurai. Yeah.
Oh, I love Speed Racer.
Yeah, he's everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's great. And so it's so fun to sort of like see, you're not a baby, but like 22 years younger than I remember. And I didn't know who he was the first time I watched it. So watching this, it's like one of those ones where you see a film from the 70s, you're like, oh my god, Christopher Walken looking like a baby. Like that's what it kind of felt like.
I had that happen yesterday because I watched Nemesis from 1992 and Thomas Jane is in it.
Oh,
and it's
cool.
just like, oh, baby Thomas Jane. He looks like he's like 13. I did not recognize him, and I'm going to have to look that up after because to me, I'm kind of like you, Chris, in that I watch more foreign films, but I'm very bad at picking up who's like people I've seen before unless I've really like Mifune I'll know, but a lot of names will just go right past me, and a lot of faces especially. And so the fact that he was in all this stuff and that, I'm gonna have to definitely look that up.
Yeah, when
you mentioned that he was in. You mentioned he was in Wolverine. Was he the old guy that gets the tech suit in it?
No, no. He's like one of the elders in that sort of. I don't remember if they were Yakuza group or what they were, but he
Okay.
does have a sword fight with Wolverine at one point, and he shouts like "You're God's mistake" and all that sort of stuff. And
Whoa!
yeah, it's a cool line actually.
Yeah,
But yeah,
and he's an amazing character in Westworld too. He's in I think it's season 2. They go to Samurai World, and he plays a character named Musashi, and he's just fantastic. He's got
They
such
go to
great
Samurai
gravitas.
World?
yeah.
Yes,
I haven't seen Westworld, but I did not expect them to go to Samurai World. That's kind of east.
exactly. Yeah. No, they have a few different parks that they slowly reveal as you go later in the series. There's not just
Oh,
Westworld. There's other parks as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's
that makes
fantastic.
sense.
Um,
Okay, I'm gonna have to watch Westworld. Is what I'm learning today.
Yes, for sure. I would definitely check it out. I was going to ask you. I was going to ask you both what you thought about this. One of the things I kind of noticed, and maybe this is just because I don't watch a lot of foreign films that are also, I guess you could say modern. This is 20 years old, but like modern films. So this isn't something that
Mm.
cropped up as much. But I noticed there's a huge amount of representation of American culture, like the product in this film.
Mhm.
Uh,
Oh, I was pointing that out too because you had in the very first scene in her apartment, you had Planters peanuts on the table, and you had right behind her, you had another piece of product placement.
Yeah, and throughout the film, it kept like to the degree that I found myself going, did they intentionally do this so they could sell it overseas? Because it just seems like there's a lot more than I would have expected.
The answer is no. I don't think that they did it intentionally to sell it overseas. I think that it has more to do with the fact that it is more just that we are sort of international to that degree.
Hmm.
And Japan and the States specifically have had a very close knit relationship when it comes to merchandise and selling of things. You got McDonald's over there, like as many as you have in America, and
Yeah,
so
yeah. Japan will do product placement for to help with the budget as much as America does with their studio films. But it is interesting to see so much American product. But yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
that was one that stuck out at me. I was just curious because again,
yeah.
I'm a newbie to this arena.
one of the things that stood out to me in this, I mentioned the music swelling in that tragic scene, but there was
Hmm.
also when she's at the hotel and she gets the tape and she walks back into her room before she puts it in, the music is amazing there. Whoever composed this did such a good job. I feel like the sound design, especially like when we're watching the tape, the sound design needs to have its own. It needs to be commended. I think that the sound design really helps to sell this film.
Oh, for sure. I mean, especially watching the tape. But no, the sound design is very, to me, probably more than like the visuals carry so much in the Verbinski one. The sound design really kind of is the driving force of the creepiness factor in this one. Yeah.
Yeah, it's another thing I think is interesting, and I'm sure many people have drawn this parallel before, but something about the idea of the unlabeled VHS tape,
Mm-hmm.
and then watching something that has no title that you don't know where it's come from. It's one of those things that I think is interesting 22 years later when people watch this, having no sense of the. I don't know if you have this issue, have this happen to you, where like there's that sense memory of like the sort of excitement of, and danger of when that used to happen,
Oh, for
when
sure.
like you would
Yeah.
have a tape and it was either labeled something weird that somebody else had drawn on it, or you bought it at a garage sale or whatever, and you have no clue what's on there, and it's literally not safe. Like who knows what could be recorded on there, because
Mm-hmm.
that's one of those formats where like people could have recorded it in their house, they could have recorded it off a TV. You have no idea what you're about to experience, and I thought this movie really captured that sort of Wild West sensibility pretty well about the idea of popping this tape in and having no idea what experience you're about to have.
It's kind of
I
like the
actually
unknown Pandora's box
Hmm.
of in Medium. Yeah.
I actually had that happen very recently because I had
Oh.
bought a Betamax and it had like 6 tapes that were labeled, and then everything else was shit that the person had recorded. And so like we're going through it and it's like, oh, that one was porn. Okay, you got to mark that. A bunch of it was just like, oh, we filmed like the Christmas holiday specials and whatnot. And then one of them was footage of the Challenger explosion the day it happened, and it was just like
God.
it was like just really weird and crazy, just because we pop it in going, okay, well, that was Christmas special, so what's this? And suddenly there's just tragedy on the screen.
Yeah.
So it was almost what you said. The other thing, though, is it's very interesting that when we're dealing with an unmarked tape, but they didn't go the easy route to do would have been to be like, it's snuff. like that would have been the easy route, but instead it's like it's like it's a film that even David Lynch would have been like, that's fucked up.
Yeah, probably, yeah. And one of the things also, while staying on the tape thing, is how this sort of plays into what I feel is kind of underrepresented in horror storytelling right now is urban legends. And but also with the tape, it kind of reminds me a lot of some other things, like whether it be found footage, the idea of you finding this horror, or that wonderful podcast Video Palace and the curse. Yeah, I love that one.
Make sure if the listeners have not heard of Video Palace, you need to go listen to Video Palace, and then after you finish, I did an interview with the creators of it on Scriptophobic. That is just great.
It's wonderful, and so yeah, it kind of reminds me of some of that, and some of the speaking of the tape, and also the unexplainable that was that America actually did away with in this one from the tape was, like, for example, Frolic and Brine, Goblins Be Thine. I don't know why that scares me.
That was an odd one. That actually, though, to jump back 1 second, though, when you were mentioning the urban legends, that line feels like something that would be in an urban legend, for one.
Sure. Yeah.
But it's interesting that, like, you mentioned that you don't see enough urban legend stuff. I think America and the West doesn't play with it nearly as much as Japan, because very early on, what this was reminding me of was a bunch of the, like, when we were watching a bunch of the anthology films, and the way that they were directly playing off of urban legends at points.
Yeah.
Japan is just filled with urban legends, to the point that like there's plenty of ones in the West, like you got the Hook, or you got the crocodiles, alligators in the sewer, whichever one it was.
Yeah.
But Japan is like every school has its own urban legend. Every street has its own. They have urban legends for the fucking girls' toilets, like which is a film which is one urban legend we'll see on the show at some point. There's just
okay.
Hanako the toilet. The idea is that there was a girl, I think she killed herself in one of the girls' toilets on like the 3rd floor. It's like the one in the back. Japan is so filled with urban legends, which I think comes from the fact that if you look at their history, and especially their history with mythology, they very strongly believe in, like, there's different spirits, there's all these sorts of things, like there's a water spirit, a fire spirit, there's a spirit for your neighborhood, a spirit for your house, a spirit for each room. And I think that it's almost like the perfect breeding ground for urban legends. But then when we take it and we watch it over here, it kind of harkens back to almost like a feeling of being younger. Because when's the last time you heard anybody tell you an urban legend?
No, it high school probably. Yeah.
Yeah, there's another thing I think is fascinating, and I think you probably agree with me that the boom that became known primarily as J-horror around this era, which this film was really one of the sort of linchpins of that happening. They all seem to have a few things in common, and we've discussed some of them on the other episode. The long-haired ghost girl, but I think one of the things that's most interesting is I feel like the centerpiece of most of these is the juxtaposition between old school ghost story and some sort of new technology.
I knew you were going to say technology. We talked about this a bit when we did One Missed Call, because that juxtaposes the cell phone technology. This uses video technology. We have Pulse uses the internet.
Right. Shutter is photography.
Shutter is photography, not Japanese, but still a good example.
Right. Yeah, well, and a lot of these, even if they're not from there, even if they're not from Japan, even if they're either Asian horror films or American films, all jumped on that bandwagon at the same time, which is like, how do you take the old-fashioned ghost story and spice it up with a tech, you know?
Well, you know what? They had the answer. They knocked it out the park when they did Fear.com, so I don't know why we're still talking about this. Obviously, it's already been nailed.
Well, listen, I'm one of like 6 people in the world that'll defend that film. It's not a good film.
I love that film. I hate the title.
The last act of that movie is like a silent film on acid. It's pretty fantastic.
First off, okay, this has now become a Fear.com review. The opening is also amazing. It has this very strong opening, then it gets really silly, and then it goes crazy.
But so going back to what we were just talking about is the idea of the sort of merging of technology with old ghost stories. Do you feel like it has something to do? I know I talked last time about how it seemed like there were certain touchstones in Kwaidan that seemed like they were being folded into a horror story because they were focuses of Japanese culture specifically. And I wonder if it's part and parcel with technology becoming a base for the fear, because it's also such a foundational element of what most of the rest of the world thinks about when they think of Japan, as far as them being leaders in the exploration and creation of technology.
I want to take you one step further on that. I'm going to say it's not just what the rest of the world thinks of it. I think Japan thinks of themselves in the same term. Japan in the 90s had a very, very strong push towards not modernization, but like the next step in that, like almost futurization.
Mm-hmm.
And like Japan is a place where if you look around it, which I haven't been to Japan, but I watch this guy. What he does is he films his walks through Japan, and he does like 2-hour walks and they're up every other day. So I've seen a lot of how Japan looks now, and there's more technology on the street in Japan than anywhere else I've seen, except maybe like Times Square. They're just packed full of technology. And then if you look at like some of the sciences, like right now, our best cloning science is coming out of Japan right now with their work with mice. And so they're leading technology and very, very, not just like, they were also one of the first places that picked up cell phones in a big way too. And so this push that they had, I think the reason that the rest of the world sees it is because Japan just is like this technological giant. So the fact that they were releasing all sorts of horror movies that looked at the fear of technology and what it is doing to their country, that makes perfect sense to me.
I also think, and this may just be me laying this onto it, but one of the things that I've noticed is horror is often either the leader in some senses in exploring things, but also it sometimes ends up being, I don't know, I guess you would call it sort of like the great questioner. You know, like when a new movement has come about, horror is oftentimes the first one to say, but what's the flip side of this? What's the dark side of this? And I think what's interesting is many of these movies are exploring the idea of what happens when we just continue to move forward with technological advances and we don't think about them in moralistic terms. You know what I mean? In the idea of the sort of the usage of good and bad. And I think in some ways these movies are playing with it in interesting ways, how they can be used for good or bad. In this case, it often becomes literalized. You know, the ghost is into this or the that. But what they're really saying is that this thing can be evil as easily as it can be good, you know, and then we should be paying attention to that as a society with the technology that we're creating.
It's funny that I think that there was a movement that actually built off of the film too. Did any of you? Did either of you have like chain mails, like chain emails around before this movie?
I thought you meant like chainmail, like a
chain email. Yeah,
no, I've never purchased any chainmail.
I have worn chainmail though. Actually, armor. I have worn chainmail.
But so okay,
like
you're talking about
along to like 10 people, and you'll get good luck. If you don't, then you get bad.
Or I had ones that were like, you'll die if you don't do this. Like, basically, they were just like, oh, I saw the ring. You got to pass this on, or you die. Let's do that. And then it's like I feel like what started those was like some hacker who wanted to infect get a bunch of malware on different systems was like, I saw the ring. Let's just try that as an email.
You know what's
Yeah,
funny
and
is
I had to like tell my aunt to please stop sending me those fucking
Oh,
things.
they're awful.
you know what'd be funny is if it turns out in the real world there's one dude who died 23 years ago, and it turns out he's the last person everybody was sending those emails to, and he never did anything with them. So he's been dead, and that's where they're all ending up, right? Everybody's sending it, and it ends up with this one dude that nobody knows is dead that's been getting them all, and he actually died because of it.
What would be even crazier though is like if you use that not as the third act to a story, but as like the background idea, and now his computer is booting up, and you start a story from this computer's booting up. You watch the computer boot up. You don't realize the guy's dead yet. It sends an email, and then you trace it back. We basically just invented our own modern day J horror
Yeah.
technological spookiness.
The plot there is basically he's passed away and he's been dead in his house for a year. Nobody knew about it. So it's the dudes that are coming in to clean up the place and get rid of the body. Of course, one of them's going to steal a computer because why wouldn't he, right? And then when he takes it home and opens it up, then of course it all starts over again. So there you go. There's your act one.
I would be that would be an interesting act one. I would also be interested in like the guy is not discovered, but somehow like it like one missed call there where the undiscovered body is the one that's doing this, and so like it just starts over again on like the anniversary. One of the emails has like a date in it that's ahead, and on that anniversary it just starts sending out again, and you got to trace it back, and you have to find this like corpse that's withered away at their keyboard.
So it's like it reawakens, kind of like when you get like a what do you get, like a Facebook anniversary post? This happened 3 years ago, and it suddenly wakes everything back up.
Oh no! I got one of the scammers, like the very famous scammers that try to get you with the Nigerian prince. Like he just gets one of those emails, and that like boots it up again for him.
That's fun.
Oh,
But speaking of the
an
film that we're
interesting
not
story.
writing, speaking of the film that's already been created that we were supposed to be reviewing. I was going to ask you something I think is kind of fun about, well, it's about a lot of these movies in this particular era, but it's one of the things, we talk about this a lot right now, how technology has kind of ruined horror films, right, in some ways, because...
Yeah.
Disagree, but yep.
Well,
They talk about it.
Right. You know, the people complain about that it's really hard for someone to genuinely be isolated the way they were in the 80s because of technology.
Yeah,
But
right.
I think one of the things that's interesting is I think there is another argument for why technology kind of sucks to use in films. And it has less to do with the isolation and all that kind of stuff and more to do with how quickly it dates. Because watching this movie is a freaking time capsule, man. You know what I mean? Like I was thinking at 22 years old, right? That's how old the movie is. That means someone who's old enough to vote right now probably wouldn't even know what a VHS, not that they wouldn't know what a VHS tape was, but they've never held one. They've never been alive at a point where that was a thing that meant anything to them, you know? And I think about the idea that how quickly that happened, you know, in the scheme of things. You know, cinema's been around for 100 years, but we've changed so much in the last 30 that the formats that we've been using have gone obsolete in such short amounts of time.
God, we've been around. It's been around for almost 130 now. We're gonna hit 150 year anniversary of cinema in our lifetimes.
I wanted to note, as far as that goes, Hideo Nakata, the director of this film, he made a new Ring film last year, simply titled Sadako, and it has to do with a YouTuber and the ghost on YouTube and stuff like that. I have no idea if it's any good, but that's an example of the technology changing and even this director changing with the series. Yeah, it's just kind of interesting. But yeah, like the tapes are. There was a bad American sequel recently, Rings, where it was like
first you watch it, then you die.
and they're like holding on to tapes still, and you know they're still talk about tapes, and it's just like, yeah, I was thinking about that. It's like young audiences aren't gonna fully understand some of this stuff, or they'll understand it, but it's still gonna feel like something from a bygone era, you know.
I almost think it would be a hilarious way to deal with that would have been, what if, you know, in that, what was it in Freddy versus Jason? You know, Freddy was trapped because nobody was having any bad dreams anymore, so he was sort of stuck. It'd be funny if, like, the ghost of Samara or Sadako or whoever was, like, stuck on VHS tapes, and because nobody was watching them, she couldn't spread her fear anymore because it's an antiquated product nobody uses. So it's like, oh, all right, well, guess what?
She would just spread to collectors and hipsters.
Exactly. She'd only be part of the boutique market now.
When you're mentioning the idea of isolation to build off of quickly, what I was thinking was what's very interesting is like people use technology as a say to say, oh, you can't be isolated with technology, as if all of us don't feel more and more isolated every day. It's like Pulse did it perfectly when it looked at how technology isolates us.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Well,
the exact opposite is happening.
right. Well, psychologically, obviously, we're isolated, but I mean, we're technically connected in a way that we've never been before. In the sense that if someone's breaking into my house, there are 30 people that I could have instantly communicating with me. That doesn't necessarily help me, but it does give me the illusion that I'm connected to people.
Correct. Yeah.
But I do
Illusion
think,
is a good term for
yeah,
that.
I do think another interesting thing about this film, and I'm curious if how you feel. I know it pops up here, and it popped up in a couple of other J horror films, but I'm curious if it's an interesting enough thematic element that you've noticed it elsewhere, which is that oftentimes these stories start with the technology and they start in the city, and then often as the story expands out and they figure out the origin or they have to look back into the past of where it came from, they often leave the city. They go to somewhere quieter that's more,
Mm.
that's more like wilderness, more of like old fashioned, and it's them sort of becoming embroiled in the story themselves, but at the same time also removing themselves from the quote unquote rat race of it all. You know, like there's that element of being removed from standard society because of this thing that you're looking into.
I think that an element of that, and we see that very strongly in here. Like if we look at the One Missed Call, both of the sequels, well, especially
Mm-hmm.
the second one though, really
Yeah.
played
Yeah.
with that, and we see that in Horrors of Malformed Men as well, which was what we did just before this episode. But one of the things that's very interesting about that to me is I think that it kind of represents like you're going back into a place. You typically where you go to is kind of more old fashioned, and it's almost like the old ways are more like they're healthier there. They're more alive. It's almost like to draw a very odd parallel. It's almost like they're going into a place where like the gods could function so that where like you look at the American gods and the gods had to leave and come to America because nobody was worshiping them anymore. It's almost like in leaving the city, they go to the areas where things like psychic powers and all that they don't get debunked; they get believed and acted on.
Hmm. And well, and it also all these technologies sort of become the harbingers of their existence still, right? Because the people interacting with them in society through these technologies end up leaving and going and sort of discovering and or interacting with them directly, you know, as opposed to through the VHS tape or the phone or the whatever.
It's actually very interesting that the way that the old like the old beliefs in that to go back even further. So you're saying the people leaving, but if we go back even further to the ghosts or what the ever or whatever hidden the technology and coming out, it's very interesting that it's like technology that is bringing them out of the old. But it's almost like the technology itself is an invitation to bring back others. But it's like they sent out a digital invite like, hey, come enjoy being tortured in this well, and people are like, oh, that sounds neat, and show up.
Yeah. Well,
It's
yeah. I mean, in the same way that it's almost as if like gods have realized that faith isn't going to do it anymore. People want proof, you know. So there's going to be the photograph where some person's face is messed up, you know, or that's going to be like in One Missed Call, you know. Each thing has this sort of like imprint of the evil in it that they see, but they can't convince anybody else is there.
it is it reminds me of there was a great quote, and I can't tell you who it was by. I read it in a book about Jean Rollins' work, and they were looking at the Gothic castle. And there was this idea that the reason the castle is so scary is because you can't ever know what goes on behind the walls. Therefore, all the horrors you can conjure can happen behind the walls. And for somebody who's in the country, I think the city kind of represents the same. It's that fear. There's so many people like misery is being ignored, but or not even ignored, but misery is just going unnoticed. But then what you see when people in these movies come out to the country is that the country has its like the rural areas of in these films has its own way of dealing with those same horrors, and there maybe it's better to ignore them because you end up murdering a child and throwing them down a well if you don't. So it's like is it better to face weirdness head on and tackle it or to ignore it? And I feel like that's a bit of a This film doesn't do it quite as much, but there are a few that we'll be getting into that kind of play with that idea of the contrast of the two.
Hmm. That's interesting. That's an interesting observation. Um, I have to ask you this just because whether you've seen it or not, I don't know if you ever drew the parallels, but having been a huge fan of this movie myself, the 1980 George C. Scott film, The Changeling. Um,
Oh, that's a favorite. That's an absolute
It's a
favorite of
good
mine.
movie. Good
yeah,
movie.
I mean, I feel like there's no way that it's not possible that it's such a coincidence that that movie, the ultimate revelation of the well underneath the floorboards, and wasn't in some way influential to this film. I mean, literally down to the discovering of it underneath the floorboards, tearing it up the same way. It just feels like how could Nakata not have known that that happened? You know?
I wonder if we can trace it back further to the novelist who wrote Ring.
Yeah.
I wonder if, because the well is, I'm almost certain the well is in that.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Uh, so I wonder.
I just got the Koji Suzuki book, and I'm hoping to read that over the month as we do these movies to have some more, context. But I don't know. Yeah, I mean, he's still writing those books.
Oh, absolutely. Like he has been, and also if you haven't heard that name before, Chris, he's also the same writer that did Dark Water. And so
Suzuki
those
is.
two, yep.
Oh, okay.
Dark Water was a short story that he did. Why the Ring series, he's done a bunch of novels in that. He definitely explores a lot of, like, both of those films have a lot of the same themes to them, and I'm going to be very interested to hear your thoughts on the book when you finish, Kel.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, I can't remember how many books that he's written that are in. I'm gonna look it up. Let's see. That are all from the Ring series. Okay, so he's got the original Ring, then Spiral slash Raisin, then Loop, and then Birthday, and then that was supposed to be like the trilogy, and then also like sort of the prequel, and then he just recently released S and Tide. So yeah, they're writing them again, and Sadako keeps going in Japanese film with whether it be the Grudge versus Ring movies or that new one that Nakata just made, which again I've not seen. I can't speak to the quality of it.
What's interesting, so you mentioned Birthday. I just want to point out that Birthday is actually a collection of short stories.
Mm-hmm.
So you have three novels, and then you have a collection of short stories. So there is a lot of exploration of this universe.
And but before this movie was made, it was actually okay. So this is not the first Ring film. The first Ring film was a '95 made for TV softcore horror film. um, uh, that was directed by Chiyushi Takigawa. And I've not seen it. It premiered on Fuji TV in August of '95. I hope to see it soon. I am intrigued and a little bit worried about the soft core element and how that figures into it. But yeah, supposedly that's actually closer to the source material than this film is. Um,
I found a copy of it, and I had scrubbed through it, and the soft core element doesn't seem overly prevalent.
okay.
It seemed, it's the one moment that I really caught on was just like, okay, a couple's having sex in a car, and it seemed very just kind of like your typical sex scene, like, oh, there's some nudity in it, but beyond that, it wasn't anything
Okay.
excessive. So I
Um,
think it's going to just be. It's just a film that every now and then you'll have tits in it, and you're like, oh, okay, this is odd for
okay.
the Ring.
Yeah. Well, on that note, also, I didn't know this until today that the sequel film Raisin, also known as Spiral, was released the same day in '98 as this film, the one directed by George Ida, that was then disowned, and they made a Ring 2 instead. Um, there was also another remake of this before the Verbinski film, which was the South Korean The Ring Virus. Now I saw that last year, and supposedly it also is closer to the source material, where it does include a virus, and also Sadako is hermaphroditic in nature in some way, I recall, and so it there's a lot of material even in the books that don't even show up in the Japanese original. So I kind of like the fact that we have so many different versions of the story, and they're all really kind of remarkably different. And then there's the books that are different too.
Do you know if the sequel Spiral was that part of the V cinema movement? In my head, I have that one linked in there the same way that the first couple. Either I think it was Ju-on the Curse before it was The Grudge. I know that the first two of those were part of the V cinema movement.
I believe that Spiral was given a theatrical release right with the original Ring, and I mean it was meant to be the part two. It's got most the same cast, but also Ida wasn't watching what Nakata was doing with his film, so the tones are so off. And it's kind of like this forgotten sequel. They seriously,
Well,
retconned it out, but I believe it. I
I
believe it
thought
was
I
a
thought
theatrical one.
I thought V cinema played on theatrically. I thought it was just that it was shot on video.
Okay, no, this was not shot on video. No,
Okay,
yeah.
okay, so then it wasn't. There another pretty big one at the time. I would have to look it up. I know that The Grudge was, and I couldn't remember. Um, I had to look into that. Okay, it's very interesting to see Ida back on the show so
Yeah,
quickly.
yeah. And and then so after that film was basically scrubbed, then they brought Nakata back to make Ring 2, which is also kind of amusing to me because then Verbinski made his Ring movie, and then when they decided to make a sequel to that, they hired Nakata to come to Hollywood to make the Ring 2 over there. But,
Yeah, and that's a weird one too because he's sequelizing a film that massively changed at least
Mhm.
the central sort of intent, I think, or at least the central mythology of his original film. So he was sequelizing a thing that was sort of a bastardized version of a thing he'd already made.
Yeah, it's odd. I mean, I know that they brought Shimizu over to Hollywood to do the Ju-on Grudge movies with Sarah Michelle Gellar, and say what you will about those. I thought the first one was all right. Yes, it's redoing a lot from what he already did in Japan, but it keeps the mood, and it works for me. But yeah, it's very similar where it's like a bastardized version that he's in control of, kind of. It's weird, but it was sort of like, again, the Asian horror boom, where it's like we Hollywood knew that they were onto something hot here, but they didn't know exactly how to do it. So hey, might as well bring the people that made it over in Japan and just just insert it here and hope for the best. And you got some mixed results with that.
Yeah, well, I think I would love to say it was mixed results. It seems like almost without fail, every single American version, I don't want to say American version, but every single American horror film that they brought a Japanese or Asian filmmaker of any kind over, I don't even want to just say Japanese, did not do super well here. Well, I'm trying to remember what are the brothers' names. The Pang brothers came over and they did the one film. Was it The
Oh,
Messengers, right? And then they were sort of
Yeah,
that
unceremoniously
was a
sent back.
bad film.
Right, but
yeah,
I guess what's what I'm saying is like I think part of it has to do with American studios didn't trust them to do the thing that they'd already become famous for doing,
Hmm.
and
yeah,
so what we
yeah.
ended up with was a bunch of sort of watered down mediocre movies because they weren't letting them do the thing that they were good at, and so they sort of just parted ways, and they haven't really. It hasn't really happened again. Like that movement, they sort of everybody went back home and started making their stuff there again. We didn't really have a situation where it remained sort of international co-productions in that
Mm-mm.
sense, which is too bad, I think.
Yeah,
I
no, I
think that you
agree.
actually touch on to bring it back to an earlier point. I think that what you're saying here too has to do with what we were saying about the difference between the Western and Eastern audiences and the way that they approach the story to begin with. Because you take a story that's supposed to be that has some ambiguity, it has its own style to it, and then you say, well, that doesn't work here, and then you try to force them to do something that's just not their style. Like how if you're somebody who understands the power of ambiguity in your film and then you're told, hey, take all that out, like
Hmm.
how do you make something that's good? Then it's a whole the entire way that you approach the story is now different from the way that you would if you were doing it yourself.
Yeah, it's like telling Nicholas Winding Refn to make a movie without neon or blood.
Oh God, bringing it back to Fear X
Hmm.
and that I love that film.
But it sounded like Kelly. It sounded like you were going to say something spinning off of what we were just talking about I don't know. I lost my train of thought.
About the Asian horror remakes, maybe.
Right. Yeah, about the and the directors in particular not really being given a chance over here.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to think. You're right though. I mean, so many times it's like you I was kind of becoming a fan of J horror at that time, and foreign film in general, and so it was sort of really cool that some of the guys that I liked from over there were coming over here, and it's like, oh, this is going to be their English language debut, and then oh shit.
Oh
um,
shit! It's the Messengers.
yeah, or they brought Kim Ji Woon over here, and he made that Arnold Schwarzenegger movie that was really mostly about a fast Corvette. Or you
Wait,
know,
what?
yeah,
Which one is the?
the last stand, I think it was called.
Oh, okay. I didn't watch that. Yeah,
Um, you know, and
pass.
I feel like I don't even like him that much, but I feel like Ryuhei Kitamura might have had the best experience over here making stuff like Midnight Meat Train and stuff like that.
Oh, that one, Midnight Meat Train works so well.
So yeah, I feel like some of them were it's like he came over here and he basically was allowed to do R-rated stuff, and it was like that's what he's known for, just throwing gore at you and everything. And I feel like so he was able to just kind of keep what he was known for. It wasn't necessarily known for really deep or moody movies. He was known for gore and aggression, and he got to do that. Whereas Nakata was known for more
Oh shit!
uh could just say nuanced, but and so he didn't really get a chance to do that. Fucking, all I can think about from his the Ring 2 in America is the attack of the CGI deer.
I watched that recently because I haven't seen Ring 2, and so I watched that, and that was that's rough.
Yeah, I also think it was interesting because I think a lot of I wonder if a lot of the possibility, and maybe I'm wrong about this, because this would have happened. What would that have been? 2003. When was the remake of The Ring?
I
The
believe that
American
one was 2002.
Oh, okay. Because it seems like at the same time, maybe I don't know, maybe people who were doing big budget or studio horror at least were sensing that there was a either a reticence from American filmmakers to work in it, and so they started going overseas or something. Because the same thing is true for was it Bride of Chucky and Freddy versus Jason were both also directed by
Oh
they were directed
yeah,
by Ronnie Yu, who I mean obviously
yeah.
he's a Hong Kong filmmaker, but it seems like they were going to places where these filmmakers were making much bigger scope films for much smaller budgets overseas,
Hmm.
and thinking, okay, well, if we get these guys to make these tentpole movies here, they'll still be inexpensive, but they'll look better because these guys are used to working on much smaller scales.
And to me that made sense with Ronnie Yu. I don't know why Ronnie Yu isn't being hired more often, but yeah, I don't know. It's kind of a bummer that Takashi Shimizu and others have kind of, even in their native Japan, have kind of faded away and become more like producer guys. I don't know. It's sort of like the I don't know. Maybe it's time for the new age of J horror filmmakers to step up, but
Hmm.
because you're not seeing the old crew put out stuff with his. I mean, Kiyoshi Kurosawa's moved on to his dramas, sometimes filming them in other countries. I think he did one in France recently. Um, uh, you know, Nakata's still doing his thing, but people have stopped paying as much attention.
Well, he did. I don't think that he evolved. I think he just kept doing the same.
The thing,
You
yeah,
mentioned a website that you were a big fan of that stopped because they basically
yeah,
said,
yeah.
Japanese horror is just now all the same. It's just incestuous.
Midnight Eye, which was run by Tom Mess and Jasper Sharp, who do a lot of the commentaries on the Arrow video things. They closed up shop because it was like Japanese film was becoming so intertwined with Japanese politics. Abe, very conservative, and also Japanese companies, and so it wasn't about art and everything anymore, or the auteur, and so they basically were like, "We're taking a break because this sucks. This isn't what we fell in love with." And to Nakata, talking about how he didn't grow, he has admitted before how he didn't want to be a horror filmmaker. He's not even
Hmm.
that big of a fan of horror,
Hmm.
and so he just kind of got shoehorned into it. I mean, yes, he before he made Ring, he made a couple of horror films that kind of got him noticed, and then he made Ring. Like I think one of them was called Don't
Don't
Look
Look
Up.
Up.
Don't Look Up.
Yeah,
That's a good
from
movie.
'96.
I think
Actually,
that's
Don't Look Up is mentioned as being where he basically learned what he was going to do with the ring on that film.
I think that's on the Criterion channel right now if you want to watch it. I think it is. It's a good film, and but it's sort of like it sort of stuck him in this role of the J horror filmmaker, partly because he kind of helped the beginning of that boom, and it's kind of a shame that he hasn't found his way out of it.
Yeah, well, I mean that's a familiar cadence too, right? Even on this side of the ocean, John
Sure, sure.
Carpenter had wanted to direct westerns, and studio pictures, and Eduardo Sanchez wasn't particularly a horror fan before they made Blair Witch Project, and they just made the thing they could afford. And I think
Right.
oftentimes that happens where you end up getting compartmentalized into the thing you become famous for because the system is going to try and keep you there because that's what they know that they can profit on.
Yeah, and that's why that Wes Craven film Music of the Heart with Meryl Streep
Hmm.
stands out so weird today. But
Or Carpenter's Elvis film, really.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. But yeah. But yeah.
Is there anything else to say about The Ring?
I want to say one thing. My favorite shot in the film that I don't think the remakes or any of them ever redo is you know uh it's at the end of the film and she can't figure out why they didn't end the curse and everything, and she
Oh,
looks in the
yes.
TV screen and the reflection is that guy with like the blanket over his head pointing at her purse. That fucking chills me. I don't
I
know.
love that. I also, okay, when you were saying at the end, I want to talk about the very last shot of the movie.
Oh
That last
yeah,
shot is absolutely apocalyptic in
it
feeling.
is, it is, yeah.
It feels like she's driving out to end the world.
No, it really does, yeah.
Yeah, and as long as we're talking about the visuals of the movie, I feel like it has to be noted that both this film and the remake, the American remake, the character coming out of the television is one of
Mm.
the, I believe, one of the iconic modern horror images now. You know what
Oh,
I mean? Everybody
absolutely.
Oh,
immediately
yeah.
knows what that is.
Yeah, and it's I kind of wish it's one of those things that now we're so used to. You see it mocked even, but I wish you could go back to see that the first time because it's like that had to have been a scare, you know. And
I'm gonna see if I can find a link to put into the description. There was a video I saw. It was like one of the Japanese talk shows, and they have a bunch of young women there, and they're it's clearly promotion for the ring, but they
mhm,
basically they trick them to have a actress like crawl out of a TV,
mm.
and all of them go ape shit scared. It is absolutely amazing because it was that terrifying.
Yeah,
I
yeah, no,
remember, I know which one you're talking about. Yeah, it was like promotional material they did for the release of the film.
Yeah, and just like so, it was like a talk show. Probably it was probably some well-known talk show. It was probably like the Japanese equivalent of like a Regis type thing. But
and
it was just absolutely screaming from like 30 different throats.
and I didn't notice until this watch of the film, uh, her when she does crawl out and you see her up close that her fingernails she doesn't have any and it's just bloody and pulpy and nasty looking. I don't remember
Yeah,
noticing that before.
well, they when they're in the well, he mentions like, oh, she must have tried to climb out.
Yeah,
She
we see
didn't
her
die,
nails. We see
and
her
so
nails stuck in there in the sides of the well and
yeah,
everything. But
so
yeah,
we know where they went to.
I feel like
yeah,
in the American version, didn't we actually see a hand where like a fingernail snapped off of it, and then
Yes, it's
yeah,
in the video. It's in the video.
right,
yeah,
exactly. I feel like that was another thing that happened in the American version is some of the creepy images ended up having stronger real world extrapolations of what they
hmm
actually
hmm
meant.
probably so.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
Like I
like
remember the horses and stuff. Yeah.
Hmm.
yeah, like that book I was reading. That's exactly what they talk about. Is like you can look at the American one and you can find out what every image in it relates to. Where if you and they actually the images in the American one too also keep some sense of like eyeline matches and whatnot when things happen.
Mm,
Like the woman looks out to one side, and then as the person's watching in the right place, they look out and they see the thing they're supposed to see.
mm,
And so there's continuity of geometry or a geography in the American one, which is just completely lacking from this one.
Do you know what the title of that book is that you're referring to?
I believe it's just called Remake in Japanese Horror. I've gonna throw it in the
Yeah, throw it in the
in the things
descriptions.
because
Yeah.
it's been in the descriptions of a couple of our episodes because I've been very slow reading this book.
Anything else you want to talk about on this movie?
No, once we got to the iconic visuals, which is the last thing I was going to mention, it sounds like we covered them. So pretty
Yeah.
much everything I
Okay.
was going to say.
Okay. Cool.
I want to take a second just to. I know we've spent a lot of time comparing the two,
Mm,
and God knows that will continue. But
mm,
in the opening of this one, when you have the two young girls and the one of them is cursed and dies,
mm-hmm.
it was very interesting to me how much more subtle her death mask was compared to that in the remake.
For
In
sure.
the remake, it's like she looks emaciated and that she looks drained, pale, mouth open as far as possible. And in this one, it looked much more realistic to me, like somebody that
Mm-hmm.
actually died of fright would look like this.
Mm-hmm.
It
Yeah.
reminded
No.
me of what is that film from like 54 or whatever, the
Diabolique.
thank you, that one. It reminded me of that, where it was just like more of a realistic way of being scared to death.
Yeah, which is funny considering where the story ends up going, that they would feel the need to hold on to the realism in the opening frames. I do wonder if that has more to do with the amount of money that an American remake from a studio would have to spend on an effect like that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Possibly, but I don't think it would cost that much to do something like more over the top. Like, I mean, I've seen low budget films, and God knows they do over the top shit all the time. They fail at it, but they try.
Yeah, but
But it,
it certainly certainly can't say it's because it was in keeping with the tone of the film, because I mean, you know, ironically in American films it's usually the entire world is normal and exactly as it is except for this one weird thing, whereas in the Japanese version of The Ring there's the girl, there's the tape, there's also the boyfriend slash husband slash, you know, ex character who also seemingly has ESP for some strange reason that goes unexplained. Like
Yeah.
they certainly don't have an issue with going to the strange well, you know, numerous times. So
Mm-hmm.
uh you know,
I think that has more to do though with like the way they feel with mythology and with their spirits and everything. Like they are like Japan compared to the West is a much more supernatural place.
right, which is why I would think you'd probably be more okay with a death that looked like it was more over the top and less like a realistic. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah. I
Oh,
hear you.
I
Yeah.
don't have anything against it. I just thought it was very interesting that they kind of kept it much more grounded there.
right.
Uh, one thing that I like, speaking of the boyfriend character in the shot that you really liked, Kel, is I like that he was kind enough to put a blanket over his head. He's like, you don't need to see this.
Yeah.
I want to help you, but you don't need to see what happened to me. Like that's not
Yeah.
good for you.
Yeah.
Very very thoughtful of him.
Yeah, a nice final courtesy of his.
I I really also liked that like he just spent that whole night working, so like he just worked and died. The poor guy.
Yeah. Yeah. But,
Subtle commentary on the the system.
uh, I think that's all I got for this
yeah.
one.
No. I think we've got it all pretty much covered. And
I was going to say,
and
save your breath, guys. You got 5 more Ring movies to talk about, right?
yeah, let's save some thoughts. And again, we don't know if Spiral is next or Ring 2 is next. It's going to sort of depend on the availability of our guests. And but we hope you tune in. And again, you can catch these movies on Blu-ray or DVD and on Shudder.
Yeah. Now, Chris, where can people find you online?
Uh, Lurking in the dark web. No,
Up in the rafters
yeah,
of the
in the
internet.
rafters. The easiest place to find me, the place that I frequent most, is actually on Twitter. I'm at CK VanderKaay, and VanderKaay is spelled how you would think, except there's 2 A's at the end, Kaay.
And which you will find a link to that in the description as well.
Yeah.
Awesome. And we'll be definitely having you back at some point.
Yeah, it was
Yes.
great having you.
Yeah, it's always a blast coming in to talk to you both. Thank you so much for having me.
And as you can find more information about what we talked about on scriptophobic.ca, where you'll see the show notes that we keep referencing. And so if you're looking for like the name of that book or anything, or the video of the young ladies getting scared, you can find that on Scriptophobic.
All right, bye.
Bye.